The sound of my table saw cutting through oak that Tuesday morning was about to change my life in ways I never imagined. And not because of the beautiful cutting board I was making. I had been running my small woodworking business from my garage in Riverside, California, for 3 years without a single complaint. My home occupation license was legitimate, registered with the city, and I followed every regulation to the letter. I made custom furniture, cutting boards and decorative pieces for local clients. The work was quiet, contained, and I only operated during reasonable hours. My neighbors had always been supportive, often stopping by to admire my latest projects or place orders themselves. That morning, I was working on a wedding gift for my cousin when I heard aggressive knocking on my garage door. Not the friendly tap of a neighbor dropping by, but the kind of pounding that suggested someone was about to deliver bad news or start a fight. I turned off the saw, pulled up my safety goggles, and opened the door to find a woman I had never seen before standing on my driveway with a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. "Are you Henry Morrison?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut the wood I had been working with. "That's me. Can I help you?" She was probably in her mid-50s, with blonde hair styled in that specific way that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager." Her pink blazer was spotless, her makeup applied with military precision, and her eyes were already narrowed in disapproval before I had even confirmed my identity. "I'm Patricia Hendricks, president of the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association. I'm here about the illegal business you're running from your home." I felt my jaw tighten. "It's not illegal. I have a home occupation license through the city." "That doesn't matter," she said, flipping through papers on her clipboard. Section 12.4 of our HOA bylaws clearly states that no commercial activity is permitted in residential properties within our community. You're in violation, and I'm here to inform you that you need to cease all business operations immediately. I stepped fully out of my garage, wiping sawdust from my hands. "Hold on. I reviewed the HOA bylaws before I started my business. There's nothing that prohibits a licensed home occupation. I checked specifically because I wanted to make sure I was following the rules." Patricia's face flushed red. "Well, the board is interpreting the rules differently now. We've received complaints about the noise, the traffic, and the unsightly appearance of your property." I looked around my well-maintained yard, then back at her. "Complaints from who?" "I've lived here for 5 years, and my neighbors are my biggest customers. Nobody has ever said anything negative to me." "The complaints are confidential," she snapped, "but I can assure you they're legitimate. You have until the end of the week to shut down this operation, or we'll be forced to take legal action." Legal action? For running a legitimate business with all the proper permits. Your so-called permits don't override our HOA regulations. Either comply or face the consequences. "We can fine you $500 per day for violations, and eventually place a lien on your property if you refuse to pay." She turned on her heel and marched back to her silver Lexus before I could respond. I stood there in my driveway, watching her drive away, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief wash over me. This was insane. I had done everything right, followed every rule, and now some power-hungry HOA president was trying to shut me down based on mysterious complaints that probably didn't even exist. I went back inside and called my neighbor, Robert, who lived 3 houses down. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Henry, what's up? Did you file a complaint about my woodworking business with the HOA?" "What? No, man. Why would I do that? I love what you do. In fact, I was going to come by later this week to talk about a bookshelf for my office." "Has anyone else in the neighborhood mentioned having problems with my work? Noise, traffic, anything?" Robert was quiet for a moment, Not that I've heard. Everyone thinks it's cool that we have a local craftsman in the neighborhood. Wait, what's going on? I explained my encounter with Patricia Hendricks. Robert let out a long sigh. Oh no. Patricia. Yeah, she moved in about 6 months ago, bought the Anderson place when they retired to Arizona. She got herself elected HOA president within 2 months by showing up to every meeting and convincing the older residents that she'd protect property values. She's been on a crusade ever since, sending violation notices for everything. My wife got cited because one of our garbage cans was visible from the street for like 30 minutes on a non-collection day. You're kidding. I wish I was. The Johnsons got fined because their front door wreath was the wrong shade of green according to Patricia's interpretation of the aesthetic guidelines. The Chens got a violation notice because their teenage son's car was parked in their driveway instead of the garage. She's out of control, but most people just pay the small fines and move on because fighting the HOA is exhausting. Well, I'm not paying anything. I have a legitimate business with a city license. She can't just arbitrarily decide to shut me down. Good luck, man. Seriously. Someone needs to stand up to her. Let me know if you need anything. After hanging up, I spent the next hour researching HOA law in California. What I found was both encouraging and concerning. On one hand, state law generally supported home-based businesses with proper licensing. On the other hand, HOAs had significant power to enforce their bylaws, even if those bylaws seemed unreasonable. The key issue would be whether their bylaws actually prohibited what I was doing, or if Patricia was just making up her own interpretation. I pulled out my copy of the HOA bylaws, the same document I had reviewed 3 years ago. I read through every section carefully, paying special attention to anything related to business activities or home use. Section 12.4 did mention that commercial enterprises were not permitted, but Section 12.5 specifically exempted home occupations as licensed and regulated by the city of Riverside, provided they do not create excessive noise, traffic, or visual blight. I had my answer. The bylaws explicitly allowed for what I was doing. Patricia was either ignorant of her own HOA's rules, or she was deliberately misrepresenting them to push her agenda. The next morning, I typed up a formal response letter. I cited the specific section of the bylaws that permitted my business, included a copy of my home occupation license, and requested that the HOA board formally review Patricia's claim before taking any action. I delivered copies to all 7 board members' homes, making sure to get signatures confirming receipt. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I came home from the hardware store to find a bright orange violation notice stapled to my front door. The paper cited me for unauthorized commercial signage and included a grainy photo of my truck parked in my driveway. On the side of my truck was my business name and phone number, a simple vinyl decal I had installed years ago. The notice demanded I remove the signage within 48 hours or face a $500 fine. It was signed by Patricia Hendricks. This was getting ridiculous. The decal on my truck wasn't a sign, it was vehicle lettering. I parked in my own driveway, but I knew what Patricia was doing. She was trying to provoke me, to build a case that I was somehow degrading the neighborhood with my business. I took photos of my truck, the notice, and my property from multiple angles. Then I called the City of Riverside Business Bureau. After being transferred twice, I reached an administrator named Susan Brooks. "Mr. Morrison, I'm looking at your file now," she said. "Your home occupation license is current and in good standing. You've never had a complaint filed with us." That's what I thought. The issue is that my HOA president is claiming I'm violating their bylaws and threatening massive fines, but the bylaws specifically allow for licensed home occupations. You have a copy of the relevant bylaw section. I read it to her over the phone. Okay, that's pretty clear, Susan said. Your license from the city should supersede any HOA restrictions, as long as you're operating within the parameters of that license. Can I ask what kind of business you run? Custom woodworking. Furniture, cutting boards, decorative pieces. I work alone in my garage by appointment only. No employees, no customers showing up randomly, no retail storefront. That sounds exactly like what your license covers. Look, Mr. Morrison, I can't give you legal advice, but I can tell you that the city stands behind the licenses we issue. If your HOA is threatening action against a properly licensed business, they may be overstepping their authority. You might want to consult with an attorney who specializes in HOA disputes. Can the city provide any kind of official confirmation that my license is valid and supersedes HOA restrictions? We can provide a letter confirming your license status and explaining the parameters of home occupation licenses under city code. That might be helpful if this goes to any kind of formal hearing or legal proceeding. That would be great. Can you email that to me? I'll have it sent within the hour. True to her word, Susan emailed me a formal letter on City of Riverside letterhead. It confirmed my license, explained that home occupation licenses were specifically designed to allow small businesses to operate from residential properties when properly managed, and noted that California state law generally protected such businesses from arbitrary restriction by HOAs. It was exactly what I needed. I printed 3 copies and hand-delivered one to Patricia's house that afternoon. She answered the door in yoga pants and a tank top, clearly annoyed at the interruption. Mr. Morrison, I thought I made myself clear. You did, and I'm making myself clear. My business is legal, licensed, and explicitly permitted under our HOA bylaws. This letter from the city confirms that. I'm not shutting down anything, and I'm not removing the lettering from my truck. If you continue to harass me with baseless violation notices, I'll be forced to take legal action against you and the HOA board for harassment and interference with my lawful business. I handed her the letter. She snatched it from my hand without looking at it. We'll see what the board has to say about this, she hissed, and slammed the door in my face. That weekend, I received a certified letter. The HOA board was scheduling an emergency meeting to discuss my ongoing violations, and I was required to attend. The meeting was set for the following Tuesday evening at the community center. I spent the next few days preparing. I made copies of everything: my license, the city letter, the relevant bylaw sections, photos of my property and workspace, testimonials from neighbors, and even a noise study I had conducted myself using a decibel meter app to prove that my work was quieter than normal neighborhood activities like lawn mowing or leaf blowing. Tuesday evening arrived, and I walked into the community center conference room at exactly 7 o'clock. About 20 residents were scattered around the room, most of them looking confused about why they were there. The board members sat at a long table at the front, Patricia in the center, flanked by 3 older men and 3 older women who all looked like they wished they were anywhere else. Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. We're here tonight to address a serious violation of our community standards. Mr. Henry Morrison has been operating an illegal business from his home, in clear defiance of our bylaws and multiple warnings from this board. One of the male board members, a thin man with white hair, raised his hand tentatively. Patricia, I thought we were just supposed to review the situation and hear from both sides. We are reviewing it, Donald. I'm presenting the facts. But you called it illegal. Shouldn't we determine that before? I've determined it. Patricia cut him off. Now, Mr. Morrison, would you like to explain why you think you're above the rules that everyone else in this community follows? I stood up, keeping my voice calm. I don't think I'm above any rules. I think I'm following them. My woodworking business is licensed by the city of Riverside as a home occupation. It operates solely from my garage by appointment only during reasonable hours. I have no employees, no signage except vehicle lettering on my personal truck, and minimal customer traffic. All of this is permitted under Section 12.5 of our HOA bylaws. I walked to the front and handed copies of my documentation to each board member. This is my home occupation license. This is a letter from the City Business Bureau confirming its validity. This is the relevant section of our bylaws, and these are testimonials from 15 neighbors stating that they have no issues with my business and in fact appreciate having a local craftsman in the community. Patricia didn't even look at the papers. Your license from the city is irrelevant. This board has the authority to determine what activities are appropriate for our community. One of the female board members, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, spoke up. Patricia, I'm reading this bylaw section, and it does seem to specifically allow for licensed home occupations. It says right here, it says commercial enterprises are not permitted, Deanne. But the next section clarifies that I know what it says. I'm the president of this board, and I'm telling you that Mr. Morrison's activities constitute a commercial enterprise that is degrading our property values and quality of life. A man from the audience stood up. It was Robert, my neighbor. I live 3 houses down from Henry. His business hasn't degraded anything. He's quiet, respectful, and does beautiful work. I think we're wasting everyone's time here. Several other residents murmured in agreement. Patricia's face turned red. The complaints I've received tell a different story. Residents have reported excessive noise, constant traffic, and unsightly conditions. What residents? Another audience member called out. I've lived here for 12 years, and I've never heard anyone complain about Henry. The complaints are confidential, but I assure you they're legitimate and numerous. I stepped forward. Then show us. If there are numerous legitimate complaints, they should be documented. Show us the complaint forms, the dates, the specific issues, because I think you're making them up. The room went silent. Patricia's knuckles turned white as she gripped her gavel. How dare you accuse me of? I'm not accusing. I'm asking for evidence. You've claimed multiple complaints, but you haven't provided any proof they exist. Meanwhile, I've provided documented evidence from 15 actual neighbors supporting my business, along with city confirmation that I'm operating legally. Donald, the board member who had spoken earlier, cleared his throat. Patricia, I think we need to see the complaint documentation before we can make any ruling. If there are no formal complaints on file, there are complaints, Patricia insisted. I've personally observed the violations. I've seen trucks coming and going at all hours. I've heard the noise. I've witnessed the commercial activity. I work from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, I said. I have appointment logs proving exactly when clients visit, and there are usually only 2 or 3 per week. I've measured the decibel levels of my equipment, and they are lower than a standard lawn mower. Everything you're claiming is either exaggerated or false. Another board member, a woman named Margaret, set down her reading glasses. I move that we table this issue until we can conduct a proper investigation. We should document any actual complaints, observe Mr. Morrison's business operations, and make sure we're applying our bylaws correctly. This seems rushed. I second that, said Deanne. Patricia looked like she wanted to explode. You can't be serious. This man is clearly all in favor of tabling this issue, Margaret asked. 5 board members raised their hands. Only Patricia and 1 other member abstained. Motion carries, Margaret said firmly. Mr. Morrison, you may continue your business as usual while we conduct our review. Patricia, please compile any complaint documentation you have and present it to the full board. Patricia slammed her gavel down. Fine. Meeting adjourned. I left the community center feeling cautiously optimistic. It was clear that most of the board members were reasonable people who wanted to follow the actual rules, not Patricia's personal vendetta. But I also knew Patricia wasn't going to let this go. I was right. Over the next 2 weeks, I noticed Patricia driving past my house multiple times per day. She would slow down, stare at my property, sometimes take pictures with her phone. It was unnerving, but I made sure to document every instance. I also installed a security camera above my garage door that captured my driveway and the street. Then the harassment escalated. I started receiving code violation notices from the city for things like my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall, a small oil stain on my driveway, and a supposedly unpermitted fence that had been installed by the previous owner 15 years ago. Each notice required me to respond in writing and provide evidence of correction, eating up hours of my time. I knew it was Patricia. She had to be filing these complaints with the city, trying to create a paper trail of violations to support her case. I contacted the City Code Enforcement Office and spoke with a supervisor. Mr. Morrison, I'll be honest with you, the supervisor said. We have received an unusual number of complaints about your property in recent weeks, all from the same source. Anonymous, technically, but they all come through our online portal from the same IP address. We're required to investigate all complaints, but we've found that most of them are either false or incredibly minor. I can't tell you who's filing them, but I can tell you that frivolous code complaints can themselves be a violation of city ordinance if they're being used as harassment. Can you document that? The fact that multiple frivolous complaints are being filed. I can make a note in our system. If this continues, we may need to take action against the complainant. I thanked him and added this information to my growing file of documentation. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks after the first one. In the meantime, I kept running my business exactly as I always had. I completed a dining table for a client in Los Angeles, a set of floating shelves for a family in San Bernardino, and 4 custom cutting boards for a wedding gift. My work was good, my customers were happy, and my neighbors continued to be supportive. But Patricia wasn't done. One morning, I walked out to my truck to find all 4 tires slashed, deep cuts that made them completely unusable. I immediately called the police and filed a report. While the officer was taking my statement, I mentioned the ongoing HOA dispute and the harassment I had been experiencing. "Do you have any evidence that this is related?" the officer asked. "Not direct evidence, but the timing is pretty suspicious. I have security camera footage, let me check it." I pulled up the footage on my phone and we watched together. At 2:30 in the morning, a figure in dark clothing and a hood approached my truck from the street. They bent down beside each tire, and though the video quality wasn't good enough to see the person's face, the deliberate movements made it clear what they were doing. "Can you email me that footage?" the officer asked. "I'll include it in the report. Do you recognize anything about the person? Height, build, clothing?" I watched the video again. "Maybe 5'6" or 7. Average build, I can't tell much else." The officer nodded. "That's vandalism. Possibly felony vandalism depending on the damage cost. We'll investigate. In the meantime, you might want to upgrade your security cameras to something with better night vision and resolution." After the officer left, I called my insurance company and arranged for a tow truck to take my vehicle to get new tires. The total cost was almost $800. I was furious, but I tried to channel that anger into something productive. I purchased 3 more high-definition security cameras and had them professionally installed. They covered every angle of my property with night vision and motion detection. I also installed motion sensor floodlights. If anyone came near my house or truck again, I would have crystal clear footage. The second HOA board meeting finally arrived. This time, the conference room was even more crowded. Word had spread through the neighborhood about what was happening, and residents were showing up to see how it would play out. Patricia called the meeting to order, looking smug. "We're here to continue our discussion of Mr. Morrison's commercial activities. I've spent the past 3 weeks thoroughly documenting the violations and impacts of his illegal business." She pulled out a thick folder and began distributing copies to the board members. "Here you'll find photographs of excessive traffic, noise complaints I've personally documented, and evidence of commercial activity that clearly violates our bylaws." Margaret, the board member who had motioned to table the issue last time, flipped through the pages with a frown. "Patricia, these are all observations you made yourself. Where are the complaints from other residents? I've personally witnessed these violations. That constitutes a complaint. But at the last meeting, you said there were multiple complaints from residents. Are you saying you're the only one who's complained?" Patricia's jaw tightened. "I'm saying that I, as HOA president, have observed ongoing violations that threaten our community standards." Donald spoke up. "I've driven past Mr. Morrison's property several times over the past few weeks, including during business hours. I haven't seen excessive traffic or any signs of commercial activity beyond an occasional car in his driveway. His property is well maintained and his work appears to be conducted entirely within his garage." "Because he's hiding it," Patricia snapped. "He knows we're watching now, so he's being more careful." I stood up. "May I respond?" Margaret nodded. "Please." "I'm not hiding anything because there's nothing to hide. I've been running my business the exact same way for 3 years. My operations haven't changed at all. What has changed is that Mrs. Hendricks has decided she doesn't like me or my business, and she's been conducting a harassment campaign to try to shut me down." I pulled out my own folder. "I've documented Mrs. Hendricks driving past my house up to 6 times per day, stopping to take pictures and watch my property. I've received 13 city code violation complaints in 3 weeks, all of them either false or incredibly minor, all filed anonymously from the same source. And last week, my truck was vandalized with all 4 tires slashed. I have video footage of the incident and a police report." I distributed copies of my documentation, including stills from the tire slashing video. Patricia's face went pale. "Are you accusing me of vandalism?" "I'm presenting facts. Someone slashed my tires at 2:30 in the morning. Someone has been filing frivolous code complaints against me. Someone has been surveilling my property multiple times per day. All of this started when you tried to shut down my business." "This is outrageous," Patricia sputtered. "I would never." "Let's see the video," Margaret said. I pulled out my laptop and played the security footage on the large screen at the front of the room. Everyone watched in silence as the hooded figure methodically slashed each tire. "Can you identify the person?" Margaret asked. "Not definitively, but the height and build are consistent with Mrs. Hendricks, and I did some research. The shoes the person is wearing in this video are Nike Air Zoom Pegasus in white and pink. I have photos of Mrs. Hendricks wearing the exact same shoes, taken from her own Facebook page. I showed the comparison images. The shoes were distinctive and the match was unmistakable. The room erupted in whispers. Patricia stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is a witch hunt. You can't prove anything. Lots of people have those shoes." "You're right, I can't prove it definitively," I said. "That's why I've turned over all my evidence to the police and let them investigate. But what I can prove is that you've been harassing me, filing false complaints, and misrepresenting our HOA bylaws in an attempt to shut down my legitimate licensed business. And I'm done tolerating it." Deanne raised her hand. "I move that we officially recognize Mr. Morrison's home occupation license as valid and in compliance with our bylaws under Section 12.5. Further, I move that we issue a formal censure to Patricia Hendricks for misrepresenting our bylaws and conducting a harassment campaign against a resident." "I second that motion," Donald said immediately. "All in favor?" Margaret asked. 6 hands went up. Only Patricia abstained. Motion carries. "Mr. Morrison, your business is officially recognized as compliant with HOA regulations. You will receive no further violation notices related to your business operations. Patricia, the board will be meeting in executive session to discuss your conduct as president." Patricia grabbed her folder and stormed out of the room without another word. The meeting continued for a few more minutes, addressing routine business, but everyone's attention was clearly still on what had just happened. After the meeting ended, several neighbors came up to shake my hand and thank me for standing up to Patricia. Robert clapped me on the shoulder. "You did it, man. That was incredible." "It's not over yet," I said. "The tire slashing is still a police matter." "Do you really think it was her?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." 2 days later, Detective Sarah Martinez from the Riverside Police Department called me. "Mr. Morrison, I've been assigned to your vandalism case. I've reviewed your security footage and the evidence you provided. I'd like to ask you a few questions and get some additional information." We met at my house that afternoon. Detective Martinez was thorough and professional, taking detailed notes as I walked her through the entire timeline of events. Patricia's initial threat, the HOA meetings, the code complaints, the surveillance, and finally the vandalism. "This paints a picture of escalating harassment," she said. "The video evidence is interesting, especially the shoe comparison. But you're right that it's not definitive proof. However, I can use this as probable cause to interview Mrs. Hendricks and see if she has an alibi for the time of the incident. What happens if she did do it?" Felony vandalism carries serious consequences, including potential jail time, but we have to prove it first. I'll be in touch. Over the next week, I heard nothing from the detective but plenty from my neighbors. Apparently, Patricia had been removed as HOA president by a unanimous vote of the remaining board members. Margaret had taken over as interim president. The neighborhood gossip mill was working overtime with speculation about whether Patricia had actually slashed my tires. Then, 8 days after our meeting, Detective Martinez called me again. "Mr. Morrison, I wanted to update you on your case. We interviewed Mrs. Hendricks, and she initially denied any involvement in the vandalism. She claimed she was home in bed at the time. However, we obtained a warrant for her cell phone records and location data. And her phone was pinging off cell towers near your street at 2:27 in the morning, right around the time of the incident. When we confronted her with this evidence, she changed her story. She admitted to slashing your tires. I felt a surge of vindication mixed with disbelief. She actually admitted it. Yes, she's been charged with felony vandalism and criminal harassment. She was booked this morning and released on bail. There will be a court date scheduled and you'll likely be called as a witness. What happens now? That's up to the district attorney's office and ultimately the court. But with her confession and the evidence, this is a pretty solid case. She'll likely be offered a plea deal. At minimum, she'll face probation, restitution, and possibly community service. Given that this appears to be connected to an ongoing harassment campaign, the DA might push for actual jail time, though that's less common for first-time offenders. After hanging up, I sat in my workshop for a long time, processing everything. This whole situation had started with a simple threat to shut down my business and had escalated into criminal charges. It seemed surreal. That evening, I received a call from Margaret, the new interim HOA president. "Henry, I wanted to reach out personally to apologize on behalf of the board. What Patricia did was completely unacceptable, and we should have recognized the harassment sooner and put a stop to it." "I appreciate that, Margaret. To be honest, I'm just glad it's over. There's one more thing. The board met today, and we've voted to update our bylaws to make it explicitly clear that properly licensed home occupations are permitted and protected. We're also implementing new procedures for how complaints are handled and documented. No single board member will be able to use the HOA as a weapon against residents they personally disagree with." That's really good to hear. This neighborhood is full of good people. I'd hate for anyone else to go through what I did. We feel the same way. Thank you for standing up for yourself. It exposed some serious problems with how we were operating. The court case moved forward over the next 2 months. Patricia's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal that would reduce the charges to a misdemeanor, but the DA's office pushed back because of the documented harassment campaign. The evidence was overwhelming. The video footage, the cell phone data, Patricia's confession, and the extensive documentation of her harassment activities. I was called to testify at a preliminary hearing. I explained the entire situation, from the initial confrontation to the HOA meetings to the tire slashing. Patricia sat at the defense table looking small and defeated, nothing like the aggressive, self-righteous woman who had pounded on my garage door months earlier. The judge reviewed the evidence and found sufficient cause to move forward with the felony charges. Patricia's attorney requested another meeting with the DA to discuss a plea agreement. 3 weeks later, I received a call from the prosecutor handling the case. "Mr. Morrison, Patricia Hendricks has accepted a plea agreement. She's pleading guilty to felony vandalism and misdemeanor harassment. She'll serve 90 days in county jail, followed by 3 years of probation. She's also required to pay full restitution for the damage to your vehicle and attend anger management counseling. Part of the plea agreement includes a permanent restraining order prohibiting her from contacting you or coming within 500 feet of your property." "She's actually going to jail?" "Yes." The judge felt that the premeditated nature of the vandalism and the extensive harassment campaign warranted actual jail time. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a calculated effort to intimidate and harm you. "I appreciate you taking this seriously. We don't take kindly to people using vandalism and harassment to settle disputes, especially when someone is just trying to run a legitimate business. You did everything right, Mr. Morrison. You had your licenses, followed the rules, and documented everything. That made our job much easier." The restitution check arrived 2 weeks later, $800 for my tires, plus an additional $500 for court costs and my time. I deposited it and tried to put the whole experience behind me. Life slowly returned to normal. I continued running my woodworking business without any interference. Orders actually increased after word spread about what had happened. Several local news outlets had picked up the story, framing it as a small business owner standing up to HOA overreach and harassment. My phone rang constantly with new clients who wanted to support someone who had fought back against injustice. I hired my first employee, a recent high school graduate named Tyler who was interested in learning woodworking. I trained him on the equipment and techniques, and he turned out to be a natural. With his help, I was able to take on larger projects and expand my product line. 6 months after Patricia's sentencing, I received an invitation to speak at a city council meeting about home-based businesses and HOA regulations. The city was considering new ordinances to provide additional protections for licensed home occupations and to create a process for residents to report HOA overreach. I stood at the podium in the council chambers, looking out at the assembled officials and residents. My name is Henry Morrison, and I run a small woodworking business from my home in Riverside. 6 months ago, I almost lost that business because one person decided she didn't like what I was doing and tried to use the HOA as a weapon to shut me down. I told them the whole story, emphasizing how important it was that I had done everything legally from the start. The city's home occupation license program saved my business. Without that official documentation and support from the Business Bureau, I wouldn't have had a leg to stand on. But I also learned that having a license isn't enough if HOAs can arbitrarily interpret their own bylaws to prohibit legal activities. I proposed that the city create a clear hierarchy of authority, making it explicit that city-issued business licenses supersede HOA restrictions, except in cases where a business genuinely creates nuisance conditions. I also suggested that the city establish an ombudsman program to help residents navigate HOA disputes before they escalate to legal action. The council members asked thoughtful questions and took notes. 3 months later, they passed new ordinances incorporating many of my suggestions. Riverside became one of the first cities in California to explicitly protect home-based businesses from arbitrary HOA restrictions, while still maintaining reasonable standards for neighborhood quality of life. I framed a copy of the ordinance and hung it in my workshop, right next to my home occupation license. Tyler finished his first major solo project, a beautiful live edge coffee table, and we sold it for $1,200. He was ecstatic, already planning his next piece. Watching him work reminded me why I loved this craft so much. It wasn't just about making things. It was about creating something lasting and meaningful with your own hands. One afternoon, while I was sanding a maple bookshelf, Robert stopped by with a 6-pack of beer. We sat in my driveway as the sun set, talking about everything that had happened. "I still can't believe Patricia actually slashed your tires," he said. "Like, that's crazy person behavior. Desperation makes people do irrational things." She probably thought she could scare me into backing down, or at least cause me enough hassle that I'd give up. Instead, she ended up in jail and you ended up more successful than ever. Funny how that works. I wouldn't call it funny exactly, but I guess there's a certain justice to it. You know what the craziest part is? If she had just left you alone, nobody would have cared. You were already running your business quietly for 3 years before she moved in. She created this entire problem out of nothing. He was right. Patricia had manufactured a crisis where none existed, driven by some need to control her environment or prove her authority. In the process, she had destroyed her own reputation, earned a criminal record, and made my business more successful than it had ever been. The HOA, under Margaret's leadership, had transformed into a much more reasonable organization. They still enforced standards for property maintenance and aesthetic consistency, but they approached violations with common sense and conversation rather than immediate threats. Several residents who had been living in fear of random violation notices told me they felt like they could breathe again. I expanded my workshop into part of my basement, installing additional equipment and creating a more efficient workflow. Tyler and I were completing an average of 3 custom pieces per week, and I had a waiting list of clients that extended 4 months out. I hired a part-time office manager to handle scheduling, invoicing, and customer communications, freeing me up to focus on the actual woodworking. My income tripled compared to what I had been making before the confrontation with Patricia. The news coverage and word of mouth from the legal case had given me more advertising than I could have ever afforded to purchase. I was booked solid and turning down projects because I simply didn't have the capacity. 1 year after Patricia's conviction, I received a letter from her attorney. She had completed her jail sentence and was requesting permission to send me a letter of apology as part of her probation requirements. The restraining order prohibited direct contact, but her probation officer could facilitate the delivery of a written apology if I agreed to receive it. I thought about it for a few days. Part of me wanted to refuse, to deny her even that small closure. But I was also curious what she might say and whether she had actually learned anything from the experience. I agreed to receive the letter. It arrived a week later, 2 handwritten pages on plain notebook paper. "Dear Mr. Morrison," it began, "I am writing to apologize for my actions against you and your business. I have spent a lot of time in counseling and reflection over the past year, trying to understand why I behaved the way I did. My therapist believes I have control issues stemming from anxiety and past trauma. That doesn't excuse what I did, but it helps me understand it. When I became HOA president, I felt like I finally had some authority and control over my environment. I took that too far. I let my need for control override common sense, decency, and the law. I convinced myself that I was protecting the neighborhood, but I was really just trying to impose my will on others. I am deeply sorry for harassing you, filing false complaints, and vandalizing your property. You were doing nothing wrong. You were simply running a legitimate business and living your life. I had no right to try to stop you. I have lost my home, my reputation, and nearly lost my freedom because of my actions. I deserve all of that, but the person I am most sorry for hurting is you. I caused you stress, expense, and fear for no good reason. I hope you can forgive me someday, though I understand if you cannot. I am working on becoming a better person. I am in ongoing therapy. I have completed anger management, and I am trying to rebuild my life in a healthier way. I have moved to a different city for a fresh start. I will never forget what I did to you, and I will carry that shame for the rest of my life. I hope your business continues to thrive and that you have found peace. Sincerely, Patricia Hendricks. I read the letter twice, then filed it away in the folder with all the other documentation from the case. I didn't feel the need to respond. The apology was for her benefit more than mine, part of her rehabilitation process. I had already moved on. That evening I worked late in my shop, finishing a cherry wood dining table for a family in Palm Springs. The wood was gorgeous, with a deep red color and flowing grain. I ran my hand across the smooth surface, feeling the quality of the work. This was what mattered. Creating beautiful things, running an honest business, contributing to my community. Patricia had tried to take that away from me out of spite and a misguided need for control. She had failed. Not only had she failed, but her actions had inadvertently made my business stronger and helped create new protections for other home-based entrepreneurs in Riverside. I thought about all the people running small businesses from their homes across the country, facing similar challenges from overzealous HOAs or local regulations. How many of them gave up when threatened? How many shut down legitimate operations rather than fight back? I had been lucky in a way. I had the documentation, the temperament, and the resources to stand my ground. Not everyone did. That's why I started volunteering with a local small business advocacy group, offering to share my story and advice with other home-based business owners facing HOA or regulatory challenges. I spoke at several events, always emphasizing the importance of proper licensing, documentation, and knowing your rights. One evening, I received a call from a woman named Jennifer who ran a home baking business. Her HOA was threatening to fine her for operating a commercial kitchen from her home, even though she had all the proper health department permits and licenses. "I heard you speak last month," she said, her voice shaky. "I thought maybe you could help me understand what to do." I spent an hour on the phone with her, walking through the same steps I had taken. Verify your licenses, document everything, research the actual bylaw language, get statements from neighbors, and don't back down if you're in the right. I connected her with the city ombudsman program that had been created partially as a result of my case. 3 weeks later, she called me back. It worked. The HOA backed down. They reviewed the bylaws and realized they couldn't prohibit my licensed business. "Thank you so much." "You did the work," I told her. "You stood up for yourself. Because you showed me it was possible." Those words stuck with me. Standing up to Patricia hadn't just been about saving my business. It had been about establishing a precedent, showing that residents don't have to be bullied by overzealous HOAs, and that properly licensed businesses deserve protection. Tyler progressed from apprentice to full craftsman over the following months. His work was now indistinguishable from mine in terms of quality. We were partners more than employer and employee. He brought fresh ideas and energy, while I provided experience and business knowledge. We landed a contract to provide custom furniture for a new boutique hotel in downtown Riverside. It was our biggest project yet. 20 dining tables, 60 chairs, lobby furniture, and decorative pieces for the common areas. The project would take 6 months and pay over $80,000. I thought back to that Tuesday morning when Patricia had pounded on my garage door, threatening to shut me down. If she had succeeded, none of this would have happened. Tyler wouldn't have a career. That family in Palm Springs wouldn't have their cherry dining table. The hotel wouldn't have custom furniture. Dozens of clients wouldn't have the custom pieces they treasured. One person's need for control could have destroyed all of that. But because I had done things right from the beginning, because I had documentation and persistence, and because I refused to be bullied, the business not only survived but thrived. The HOA was now genuinely supportive. Margaret remained president, and under her leadership, the organization focused on maintaining property values through reasonable standards and community building rather than intimidation. They organized neighborhood events, negotiated group rates for services like landscaping and pest control, and mediated disputes with common sense. I served on a committee that rewrote the bylaws to be clearer and more fair. We eliminated ambiguous language that could be weaponized by vindictive board members. We created an appeals process for violation notices. We established term limits for officers and requirements for regular elections. The HOA became what it was supposed to be, a tool for maintaining the neighborhood, not a weapon for petty tyrants. 2 years after the initial confrontation, I bought the house next door to mine when it went up for sale. I converted it into a proper workshop and retail space, with proper commercial zoning and all the necessary permits. My business had outgrown the home occupation model. I was now employing 4 people full-time and needed real commercial space, but I kept my original workshop in the garage too. Sometimes I would go in there late at night when everyone else had gone home and work on small personal projects. That space represented something important: the freedom to create, to build a business, to pursue a craft without unnecessary interference. On the wall, next to my framed home occupation license and the city ordinance, I hung a photo from that first HOA meeting. It showed me standing at the front of the room, presenting my documentation while Patricia glared from the board table. Robert had taken the picture and sent it to me later. I looked stressed in the photo, but determined. That determination had carried me through. When faced with threats, harassment, and even criminal vandalism, I had refused to back down because I knew I was right. I had the law on my side, the truth on my side, and ultimately justice on my side. Patricia had served her time and moved away, hopefully to find a healthier way to live. I bore her no ill will now. She had been the catalyst for positive change, even if that hadn't been her intention. The new city ordinances, the reformed HOA, the expansion of my business, the protection of other home-based entrepreneurs, all of that had come from standing up to her unreasonable demands. The Business Bureau even created a new program specifically to support home-based businesses facing HOA challenges, providing free legal consultation and advocacy. They named it the Morrison program, after my case. Susan Brooks, the administrator who had helped me from the beginning, called to tell me about it. "Your case showed us that we needed to do more than just issue licenses," she said. "We needed to help business owners defend those licenses when they came under attack. You paved the way for that." I attended the launch event for the Morrison program, where the mayor praised my courage and persistence in defending not just your own business, but the rights of all home-based entrepreneurs in Riverside. It was surreal, being celebrated for something that had started as a nightmare. But that's how change often happens. Someone faces an injustice and refuses to accept it. They fight back, document everything, follow the rules, and persist even when it would be easier to give up. And sometimes, if they're lucky and stubborn enough, they win. And that victory ripples outward, creating protections and precedents that help others. I never set out to be an advocate or a test case. I just wanted to make furniture in my garage. But when that simple goal was threatened, I discovered I was willing to fight for it. And in fighting for it, I changed not just my own situation, but the entire landscape for home-based businesses in my city. Tyler and I finished the hotel furniture project on time and under budget. The hotel's grand opening was featured in the local newspaper, with photos of our custom pieces prominently displayed. We received 3 more commercial contracts within a month. I hired 2 more craftsmen and moved fully into a management and design role. I still worked with my hands when time allowed, but increasingly I was focused on growing the business, mentoring my team, and taking on more complex design challenges. 5 years after Patricia pounded on my garage door, Morrison Woodworks employed 12 people and operated out of a 5,000-square-foot workshop. We had clients throughout Southern California and were shipping pieces nationwide. Annual revenue exceeded $1.2 million. None of it would have been possible without that first home occupation license, without the support of the Business Bureau, without the documentation and persistence that saw me through the confrontation with the HOA, and without the legal system that ultimately held Patricia accountable for her actions. I still lived in the same house where it all started, though now it was just my residence. The original garage workshop remained, preserved almost like a museum to remind me where I came from. Sometimes, I brought new employees there for their first day, showing them the humble space where the business began, and telling them the story of how we almost didn't make it. The lesson, I would tell them, is that you can't let anyone bully you out of pursuing your goals as long as you're doing things the right way. Get your licenses, follow the rules, document everything, and stand your ground when challenged. The law protects people who do things right. But you have to be willing to fight for that protection. The neighborhood had become a source of pride for me. Property values had increased steadily. New families moved in, attracted by the community atmosphere and the reasonable HOA management. Several residents started their own home-based businesses, including a graphic designer, a music teacher, and a woman who made custom pet accessories. The HOA welcomed them all, understanding now that small businesses contributed to the neighborhood's character and vitality rather than detracting from it. Margaret eventually stepped down as HOA president, and Robert took over. He ran the organization with the same common-sense approach, and the neighborhood continued to thrive. We organized quarterly meetings where residents could voice concerns or suggestions, and the board actually listened and responded thoughtfully. I never saw Patricia again. I heard through the neighborhood gossip network that she had moved to Oregon and was working as a receptionist at a dental office. I hoped she had found peace and learned from her mistakes. Everyone deserved a second chance, even someone who had tried so hard to destroy what I had built. On quiet evenings, I sometimes sat in my original garage workshop, surrounded by tools and the smell of sawdust, and reflected on the journey. It had started with such a simple goal: make beautiful things from wood and earn a living doing it. That goal had been threatened, defended, and ultimately achieved beyond my wildest expectations. The home occupation license that had saved my business hung on the wall, slightly faded now but still legible. Below it was the letter from the Business Bureau confirming my compliance with city regulations. Next to that was a photo of the first HOA board meeting, where I had stood my ground against Patricia's baseless accusations. And finally, there was a framed copy of the city ordinance that now protected other home-based business owners from facing what I had faced. Together, these items told a story of challenge and perseverance, of knowing your rights and defending them, of refusing to be intimidated by people who abuse whatever small authority they hold. They reminded me that justice, while sometimes slow, was ultimately achievable for those willing to fight for it. Morrison Woodworks continued to grow and succeed, built on a foundation of quality craftsmanship, ethical business practices, and the hard-won legal protections that ensured we could operate without fear of arbitrary interference. Every piece we created carried with it the spirit of that fight, the belief that good work, done properly, deserves to exist and thrive. And it all traced back to that Tuesday morning when an angry woman with a clipboard tried to shut me down, and I decided to stand up and say no. That single moment of defiance had changed everything, not just for me but for countless others who would benefit from the precedents and protections that emerged from that conflict. The saw blade cut through wood with a familiar whine, the sound that had started this whole journey. But now, instead of representing a threat to be silenced, it represented freedom. The freedom to create, to build, to pursue excellence in craft and business without unnecessary interference from those who would rather control than enable. That freedom was worth fighting for. It always would be.